Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the Drinking Water Source Protection Program, or as we call it, DWSP2. I'm Noreen Gallagher with NYS and DOH, and with me today is Kristin Martinez with DEC. We are both members of the DWSP2 team. We're going to throw a lot of information at you over the next 15 minutes, so definitely bear with us. So what is DWSP2? It's a program to assist municipalities with proactively protecting their drinking water sources. So this time it includes assessment, protection, and implementation by helping to develop and implement municipalities with their own unique drinking water source protection plan. So just a little background, in 1996, Congress amended the Safe Drinking Water Act and added the Source Water Assessment Program, or as many of you may know it as SWAP. And that required states to evaluate the susceptibility of each source of public drinking water to contamination. So the SWAP reports generated in the early 2000s from this effort were an imperfect product, but it did provide a baseline or foundation for source water protection efforts in New York today. Next slide, Kristin. So in 2017, Governor Cuomo signed the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. This allocated funding to the Environmental Protection Fund specific to source water protection. So at this point, DOH and DEC formed a partnership and worked together to create DWSP2. So shortly after the bill was signed, a multidisciplinary stakeholder group was established to form the vision of DWSP2. This group included members from various organizations such as AWWA, Riverkeeper, New York Rural Water Association, and many more. So this group highlighted the need to not only update those source water assessments, but also the need to push for implementation of source water protection projects. So the SWAP effort in the early 2000s was a step in the right direction, but it did fall short. There was no programmatic support for implementation and no engagement at the local level. And this is where DWSP2 really wants to focus their efforts with community involvement and implementation of projects. So next slide, Kristin. So DEC and DOH, in collaboration with the Department of State and Ag and Markets and a number of other organizations, work together to create a DWSP2 framework. So this framework is being utilized by technical assistant providers throughout the state. So they're working with communities free of charge to develop a community-specific DWSP2 plan. So what are some of the benefits of a DWSP2? Next slide, Kristin. So as you can see here, protecting public health. So by having a complete assessment and implementation strategy, you're protecting public health by preventing pollutants from entering the drinking water supply. So this could also lead to avoiding costly drinking water treatment costs. And then sharing the news of this effort with your community could increase their confidence in their drinking water supply, as well as elected officials or town board members for going that extra mile to protect their source. You could also be creating long-lasting partnerships that will aid your community well into the future for plan implementation and maintenance. Communities can utilize several existing funding sources to aid with costs for implementation efforts, and then also save time in the long run. So for example, there's a community out in Western New York that recently had an all hands on deck emergency situation. They are now participating in the DWSP2 process, and which could aid with these situations in the future when they arise. So how can we help? So how can the state help with developing a DWSP2 plan? So by working with one of many technical assistance providers who we will get into in a second, you can expect free technical assistance as you go through this entire process. Also, flexible schedule. There's no time scale for completion. Communities can set their own pace. We understand that there are other competing priorities and projects going on in communities. Little work outside of regular meetings to complete the plan. So this may only take 2 to 4 hours of your time a month due to the help of a TA provider. You'll get a drinking water source protection map with a complete inventory of potential contaminant sources. So this information will allow the group to protect the source water against current and future sources and land use changes. You're going to have a thorough list of implementation actions to address those current and future potential contaminant sources and land use changes as well. And then DWSP2 can also be completed with other projects to utilize an existing stakeholder group and those meetings that you're having. So, and it was also designed to be complementary to other programs, such as the NRI, so the Natural Resource Inventory. And then a state-accepted DWSP2 plan may provide the community with additional points for various funding sources. So for example, WQIP, which Kristin will discuss in a moment. Next slide. So here we got the map of New York State. We got over 20 technical assistant providers throughout the state, free of charge to help any community in New York State. So you got DOH with the New Epic regional staff, you got New York State DEC staff, New York Rural Water Authority, regional planning boards, and then state hired consultants, all available to help. So they'll work with the community and they'll use the DWSP2 framework, which we'll discuss in a second here, to develop a protection plan for the community they're working with. So what kind of items can those technical assistant providers help with? Help establish the stakeholder groups and coordinate those meetings. They can help identify and or delineate source water protection areas and prepare maps, gather information on potential contaminant sources, assist in source water protection project implementation, and also offer guidance on funding sources to fund such projects. So as you can see on the map, the dots, we got 38 communities currently working with technical assistant providers. We're looking to grow this program and want to work with more communities across the state. So if you or any community you know is interested in this program, please reach out to us. Next slide, Kristin. So we do have our application online on the DEC DWSP2 website. Like I said, if you're interested or you know a community that might be, please reach out to us. You can fill out this application, but just please be sure to include as much detail as possible when completing it. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to that email at source.water@dec.newyork.gov. And now we'll get into a little bit of the framework here. So this is the product that we produced with DOS and Ag and Markets, DEC, and other organizations. So communities will go through this effort with a TA provider. The framework guides that TA provider and municipality through the process of creating a unique protection plan that will work for the community. So it's easy to follow. It's broken up into 4 phases and 8 key components of the plan, as you can see here. So first up, we have the stakeholder group. So we want to ensure that there's community involvement and buy-in from the beginning. We think that is the main focus. A stakeholder group can be created. If you choose to apply, you will have a TA provider that can aid with selecting key participants. The group does not have to be new though. The community can utilize an existing stakeholder group to work on the program. So the purpose of the stakeholder group is to bring diverse stakeholders together so everyone involved can understand the benefits and impacts of the proposed program, bring various resources. So there might be different expertise, staffing, funding, and then identify common ground to improve watershed and aquifer health. And then once that stakeholder group is established, they will formulate a vision and establish goals to help align priorities and resources as the plan is developed. So the framework does include some examples of these goals and visions. So you can protect public health, protect against taste and odor issues, and reduce treatment costs. And the long-term success of source water protection often depends on the acceptance, buy-in, and participation of key stakeholders. The vision will help to garner support for the following phases of the plan, which Kristin will now get into. So over to you, Kristin.
Thanks, Nora. So now we're going to head into phase 2. This is the drinking water source assessment. So this is where we begin the technical aspect of the document, but just a reminder that we have TA providers that could help you, again, free of charge to complete these components. So the first component you see here is developing an overview of your water system. And that's basically just basic information about the system, water quality, and quantity. The second item there is the drinking water source protection map. So this is going to involve revisiting the map developed in the community's original SWAP report that Nora went over earlier, or maybe creating a new map with updated information. So the technical assistance providers will help the community with updating and completing their maps and delineations using GIS or some other visual tool. And then last in this phase is to create a potential contaminant source inventory. And that's to identify all possible contaminant sources in the previously delineated protection areas on your map. This inventory is going to aid in the selection of protection and management methods, which I'll get into later on. One note I wanted to make is throughout this phase and the entire plan, we do encourage communities to use their local knowledge to make sure that this is a plan that's specific to their community. So now we're going to move into phase 3 of the framework, and this identifies protection and management methods that the community can take advantage of to protect their source of drinking water. Protection methods are broken down into 3 categories that you see on the left hand side of the slide. The first is land use. As we developed this program, it really became clear that land use is critical to protecting drinking water supplies. As you all know, this is a home rule state, and municipalities can have a lot of say in the area surrounding their source water. So we broke down land use further into 2 categories, and that's what you see here, regulatory and non-regulatory. And some things that you'll find in our framework under regulatory are municipal comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, critical environmental areas, intermunicipal agreements, and much, much more. And under non-regulatory, you'll see things like land purchase and conservation easements, encouraging best management practices, intermunicipal organizations, and more. The second item under protection methods is monitoring and reporting, and it's just that, monitoring and reporting your source water area. And then the third is going to be outreach and education. So that can include things like press releases, newsletters, signage, training, or presentations like the one we're doing today. In addition to the protection methods list, each potential contaminant source that's listed in our framework under component 2.3, so that's where you created your inventory, has their own set of management methods broken up into the categories you see here on the right. So they're either going to be a step-by-step process or a list of best management practices that a community can utilize. Next in this phase, we really want to keep this DWSP2 plan on track and truly have this be an implementation effort. So you're going to create an implementation timeline for the protection and management methods that you identify. So on this slide, you'll see some of the things that the framework suggests you keep in mind when creating that timeline. So you might be thinking, you know, this outline is great, all of these protection management methods sound great, but they can be costly. The framework does list over 20 federal and state funding sources that municipalities can apply for to aid with the implementation of their protection management methods. We really hope that technical assistance providers and communities scan through this list and highlight the sources that could aid with those costs. One example I wanted to go over that's included in our framework that could aid with those implementation costs is the DEC's Water Quality Improvement Project Program, also known as WQIP. So this provides funds to municipalities and land trusts to acquire lands that protect their sources of drinking water. Communities can apply for this funding to acquire lands within the critical source water protection areas of their completed DWSP2 plan. One thing that's great about this program is it has a great tie into DWSP2. In the most recent round of funding, so this past summer, a community could receive the maximum number of points under the performance measure category if they were looking to acquire parcel or parcels, multiple, within their critical area of the DWSP2 plan. The past 2 rounds have had a maximum award of $4 million with a low local match requirement of 25%. And I did want to show one example in the area. So this is City of Port Jarvis. They were awarded $1.8 million in round 15 to acquire over 1,000 acres, a mix of outright purchase and conservation easements to protect their source water. So those are the parcels that you see highlighted here in yellow. Not only will the parcels protect their source of drinking water, but it's also going to allow for passive recreational trails for the community to use. If this community were developing a DWSP2 plan or maybe decides to apply in the future, they're already one step ahead of their protection methods. That might be included in their implementation timeline. So I'm going to go back to the framework and just finish up the last component. After going through this entire effort, we would hate to see this plan sit on a shelf. You know, that would be a waste of your efforts and you might not see some of the benefits that we previously mentioned in this presentation. So to prevent that from happening, a plan management team should be designated. And this could be members from your stakeholder group that were there from day one, or someone else that the technical assistance provider could aid in selecting. And this group should ensure the protection plan is completed and the previously identified protection and management methods are being implemented, and also keep all the parties and communities involved up to date on the progression of this DWSP2 plan. So before we close, I just wanted to share some of the links that could aid your communities. The first here is a link to our DWSP2 webpage, and you can find a bunch of resources there and the application. The second is a link to that WQIP program we just went over, and you could see some of those requirements. Then the third is a DWSP2 newsletter, and this goes out monthly. It's a great way to stay up to date on the program, any new resources that are available, and we also highlight source water related funding when it's available. And then the last is Making Waves. That's also a newsletter that goes out weekly that covers source water related topics. And we just wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen here on this program. And if you guys have any questions, here is our contact information. And at this time, we'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristin and Noreen. If you have questions for them, please put them in the chat. You can either direct message me or send it to everyone. We've got one question that has come in asking how DWSP2 plans are different from the watershed plans that I mentioned in my talk or 9-element watershed plans.
Yeah, Nora, feel free to jump in, but that's a great question. We've definitely received it quite a bit. DWSP2, so it is to protect a public drinking water supply, and this effort is going to look at point and non-point sources. So it's going to look at all the sources that are going to be in your source water protection area to then identify protection and management methods that could address those sources to protect your drinking water supply. So a 9-element plan is going to look at nutrients, non-point sources. DWSP2 is really going to look at everything in that source water area.
Great, thank you. Got another question about security for drinking water in developing these source water protection plans. How do you provide information without mapping locations that might become targets for those who might do harm to communities? What's the latest on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have Public Health Law 1125. So that is to be discussed with water operators, and it's under their discretion if they want that information public. So we really rely on that law to move forward with, making that public knowledge.
Great. Oh, we've got some great questions coming in. What obligation comes to a community which has completed a DWSP2 plan? Do they become accountable for enacting or failing to enact their plan?
Yeah, it's not, this is a volunteer program. So, communities can decide if they want to apply. I guess, that stakeholder group kind of holds itself accountable on what they're going to do with this plan. We would like for it not to sit on a shelf, but it's really up to that stakeholder group to take those protection management methods and that plan management team and implement their efforts.
How does DWSP2 work for groundwater sources of drinking water?
Yeah, so it's going to be the same way. So we do have guidance that is different for surface water as well as groundwater sources. So it would just be mapping the critical areas around the wells, and then as well as the surface water area too. And then they also have ownership and control areas that they have guidance for in there. But same approach, you're going to be listing out those potential contaminant sources and having planning efforts for those.
Great, thank you. And for the last question, I'm going to combine two, which is there a list of communities that are currently participating in DWSP2, and would this Quassia Creek, the Washington Lake watershed with the contamination from Stewart Air National Guard, would they be eligible for DWSP2 assistance?
Yeah, so we do have a list of the communities that are participating up on the DEC DWSP2 website. So go to that and check it out. And then, yes, communities that do have intakes or wells are welcome to participate in the program. We are in discussion, DOH, New EPIC staff are in discussion with Newburgh. So that is on our list of communities to potentially help out in the future.